Happy politics and welcome to the best BC politics podcast called BC Poly Hot Stove. We know you have your choice in podcasts called BC Poly Hot Stove, and we thank you for choosing this one. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner by...
Jordan Bateman, VP Communications, Independent Contractors and Businesses Association. I can tell you, you're correct. We are the #1 podcast in the BC Poly Hot Stove category on iTunes.
That's probably almost indisputably true. I mean, we must have quite an archive now, Jordan. I don't even know. We don't number our shows like Unspun does.
Yes, we don't have to prove anything, but just bear in mind we did start a couple weeks before Unspun. So
this is true.
We are the great grandfather of all podcasts on the Orca podcasting network.
I used to call Unspun the mothership, but I'm now wondering if that should be us. Apologies to George and Jody. Jordan, it is a short week because of the Easter break. It is an off week in terms of the legislature, but politics never sleeps. And in fact, shortly before joining you for this Zoom session, it is Tuesday morning, about 11:20. Politics is heating up in the Vancouver-Kilchena by-election. There was an event this morning. The NDP candidate, Jeanette Ash, was joined by Mental Health and Addictions Minister Sheila Malcolmson to take shots at the BC Liberal candidate, who happens to be the leader of the party, Kevin Falcon. What is notable, Jordan, is not that they were taking shots at their opponent, which is, I mean, it's politics, it's an election, that's fine. I'm quoting Katie DeRosa's Twitter feed here, holding a presser now to slam BC Liberal leader for cuts made to mental health and addiction services while he was in government. To be blunt, Kevin Falcon doesn't care about people in crisis. And then pointing to comments in 2008 after a woman threatened suicide on the Second Narrows Bridge. When asked about barriers on the bridge, Falcon said, if people are trying to kill themselves, it is tough to stop them. Sadly, I believe that is true. And let's talk a bit about the attack here. Doesn't care about people in crisis. I don't like when politicians accuse someone else about not caring about something as dire as, people dying in a public health crisis. It's been done in this province, and it's usually ugly. I would also submit that if you are going to go there, dear God, choose someone else on your bench other than the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, who has overseen record numbers of overdose deaths as the government continues to ignore the coroner's requests for some fairly substantial changes. Look, this crisis continues to set the wrong kind of records every month. This was not the person to send out to make this attack, Jordan.
No, you're exactly right. Look, it's pretty rare that I would call for a minister to resign in shame. I would call for this minister to resign in shame. However, based upon what has gone on in the past 3 years in this province, there are record numbers of opioid overdoses. We all know that. We're all troubled by this. I trust that everyone in government, opposition, the green benches are trying to work towards reducing that number of people. But on her watch, Sheila Malcolmson's watch, we've had record suicides or record overdose deaths, and absolutely, no tangible gains when it comes to helping people's mental health. So, this is a garbage attack from a failed minister, and reaching back 10, 12 years, Falcon left government in 2013.
Yes.
So you're reaching back 9 years and smacking someone with lines that you used to use about Christy Clark 6 years ago. Look, you've been in charge of this file for 5 years now. This is not like some, little blip here. For 5 years, you've been in charge of this file, and it's been demonstrably worse year after year after year after year. And John Horgan used to criticize Christy Clark for being heartless and not caring, and now he has seen more deaths on his watch than Christy Clark saw on hers. And, we always talk about we hate whataboutism in politics. And what about that? What about that? But this is your perfect example of it, right? Shut up. You have no right to stand there and criticize any government of a previous stripe. And here's the funny thing. Back before Falcon banged his head and decided to go back into politics, which I'm assuming is the result of some sort of, he had a pretty good life and he decided to go back into politics.
Yes.
I presume that something happened to push him back into that, and he's we can get into that another time. But he wrote an op-ed for the Vancouver Sun. This is before he decided to launch a leadership campaign. He wrote an op-ed for the Vancouver Sun talking about mental health and addiction, and specifically the downtown east side, which, by the way, has only worsened in the 2 years or so since he wrote that piece. And in it, he was pretty clear, like, this is a systemic failure by consecutive governments. He didn't say it was just the NDP's fault. He said, no, look, the Socreds in the 80s, they have responsibility for this. The NDP of the 90s have responsibility for it. The BC Liberals of the 2000s had responsibility for it. And the current NDP government also has responsibility for it. It's been a failure across all political stripes, ideologies. And I think you and I can sit there and go, yeah, things are a hell of a lot worse now than they were 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And each of these governments have to stick up their hand and look in the mirror and say, yeah, we contributed to it. So to go out there and claim somehow that like Falcon is responsible for this is such it blows the mind that you would think that is an attack line that would actually work. And let's not forget, okay, the second Arrows comment, which by the way I believe is called the Ironworkers Memorial Bridge, the comment about how difficult it would be to prevent people from committing suicide is one that's kind of proven out. SkyTrain, for example, is a major magnet for people who are struggling, and suicides happen there quite a bit. Only Bob Mackin ever really digs into how many, because we don't want to talk about it, and we kind of try to hide the facts so that no one else gets that idea. But again, very difficult to prevent. You could put gates or things across the platforms and stuff, but we don't do that there. And then I just go back to John Horgan. Like, we're in the middle of a heat dome, and he says fatalities are just a part of life. We have an airborne pandemic going on, and he's like, just keep a little hand sanitizer in your purse, you'll be fine. Like, that's like, what do you think? Like, what are you thinking that this is like some sort of a great attack line that you're going to go after? So Sheila Malkinson really embarrassing herself, embarrassing her ministry, which was already an embarrassment. The Ministry of Air, as it's well known as now, thanks to the Orca and, frankly, the ministry's own terrible performance. And frankly, if Horgan was smart, he would dump her as a minister, put an actual, successful politician into that portfolio, give them enough money to actually do something about this and move on. But instead, he trots her out to Vancouver Kilchana to stand next to Mayor Stewart's wife, who's a candidate. By the way, things have gotten worse on Candy Stewart's watch in Vancouver as well. I do not understand why the NDP think this is going to work.
I've never liked the specific attack that a politician doesn't care about something, especially when we're talking about people dying. Mm-hmm. There was a question period a few weeks back where I think it was Mike DeYoung saying that when he was in government, he remembers fielding these questions and the accusations really from the other side saying, you don't care about this, you don't care about this, and this is DeYoung's word saying that really stings, and that if the situation is ever reversed, I pledge not to do that, because I don't believe that you don't care. You may not have the right answers. Clearly, that's the case. But not caring about people dying is a ghoulish thing to accusation level against someone. And it's disappointing to see that happen here. Again, I wouldn't have advised anyone to say this about anyone in a by-election. But for the sitting minister who has seen the situation spiral, just get worse and worse and worse every month, to say that person doesn't care is just so. Minister, either you don't care or whatever you're doing is not working. There really aren't two other options here, and I don't believe the minister doesn't care. I would never believe that for a second. I think she does care very much. I'm sure it weighs heavily on her, but the fact is the numbers keep getting worse, and that was just a breathtakingly irresponsible and stupid thing to say.
Yeah, don't confuse ineptitude with uncaring. Is that what you...
Yeah.
I agree, but it's the old NDP playbook. Like, they've been beating this drum for so long, they actually believe it, and that's the problem, right? In their heart of hearts and their ideology, their thing, they really believe that somehow the monsters of Christy Clark and Gordon Campbell and Kevin Falcon somehow have caused this horrible thing to happen. And we all sit there and go, if that's what you believe, if you believe politicians have that much effect over this, then you must be doing a especially, close your ears kids, shitty job of managing this file. because you're even worse than them. Like, by every metric, it's worse. And that's not on Kevin Falcon being a finance minister 10 years ago. That's on you. That's you, Sheila Malcolmson. Look in the mirror. Physician, heal thyself. Like, this is up to you. So I find the whole Kilchenna by-election on all sides just completely baffling. Like, number one, you have it called for a Saturday in April, Saturday, April 30th. We don't generally have provincial elections on Saturdays. That's kind of a municipal thing. And are there is there a lower attended, lower turnout election than municipal elections? No, except in Port McNeill, where people race to the polls to vote for Gabby Wickstrom. But like generally it's lower, and I think that's the NDP trying to tamp down voter turnout a little bit to give them a shot. The campaign seems to have been about affordability, but it's Vancouver, Kilchenna, maybe the wealthiest postal code in the province. And really the affordability issue there is kind of property taxes, which again goes back to the guy who's in the mayor's chair, not the people who are running to be MLA. And then you've got this weird attack. And yeah, like I understand we like to pretend that the mental health issues and addiction issues are really confined to a couple square blocks of downtown East Side. They're not, obviously. They spill into every way of life. But then like this is the thing they can get Falcon on. Like it baffles me. Before we leave the topic though, like let's talk about Lynda Steele's great piece in the Orca, because I read that this morning and it was fantastic. And you talk about someone who is speaking with compassion but also common sense. I felt like that was Lynda's piece this morning.
It certainly blew up on Twitter, and I don't think Lynda would mind sharing with you. I received an email this morning from somebody who was quite upset with Lynda's piece. Yes, the content, he disagreed with it. And no, I'm not going to name you, so relax. But thought that we should have a disclaimer on there that Lynda's husband is the is the chief of Surrey Police, and so there's a conflict of interest. I wrote back to this gentleman explaining that Lynda is a fully grown-ass woman who has her own opinions. The byline says Lynda Steele, and
no one knows that she has opinions more than Normal Lipinski does. Trust me, he's aware.
More polite in email. I did not type out the words "grown-ass" in my official response, but also that to the best of my knowledge, Lynda doesn't live in Surrey, and I know for sure isn't in a position to direct or make government policy. And so I really don't see what the concern is here. But yeah, it's that column certainly touched a nerve, because I think it's a reflection of what a lot of people are experiencing. I won't say for certain because I don't live in Vancouver, but that is my impression from talking to people who live there every day. And it certainly mirrors the experience of a lot of people here in Victoria.
Yeah, I think a lot of us across the province, especially in the urban centers in Victoria and Vancouver, are coming to the realization that we have got to do whatever it takes to get people who are struggling with their mental health the help they need. Even when they don't, even if it means trampling a little bit on their consent in order to give them a fighting chance. Like, you walk around Vancouver, the streets of Vancouver, anywhere now, like Langley, Langford, Victoria, you see people who are clearly not mentally well, who are struggling with diseases, schizophrenia, and it's OCD, other things that are just shredding their lives. And it's the child test, right? Like Maclean, like if it was my kid or your kid and they were having these mental health issues, we would do whatever it takes to get them the help they need. We would go to the streets and pull them off if we had to, and find a way to get them the help they need, because that is what compassionate people do. You don't want to see like this happening. But because they live on the downtown East Side, we kind of ignore it, or maybe just kind of section it off. And I think even the NDP are coming to the realization that like we've got to get people help. And this goes back to Falcon's piece from a couple years ago, right? Like closing Riverview has proven to be an error. It was proven to be incorrect, because at least you had a place where people could get help, could start to deal with these issues, where you could medicate them properly rather than having them self-medicate themselves. Like we got to, there's a group of, I'm not sure what the number was that Lynda flew out, 300, 400 people who, a big chunk of them clearly need help and are incapable now of asking for it.
Yeah.
And so we've got to figure out a way to do it. And I go back and I think of, I think EB has a bill or had a bill before the House or a plan before the House to essentially take young people and put them into help, whether they want it or not. And I'm old enough to remember when the NDP shredded Rich Coleman as housing minister for suggesting the same thing. I mean, absolutely, like he was heartless and uncaring and, trampling on consent and they've come to the realization a few years later that, geez, we've got to do this, right? And, you see the experience of progressive cities in the States. San Francisco comes to mind, LA, where, Seattle, where, the path we're on right now hasn't worked. So we can actually look 10 years in the future and go, holy smokes, this is not getting better unless we do something different. So are we going to do what they're doing and end up where they are in 5-10 years? Or are we actually going to do something different and try something else? And I think that's what the NDP are coming to terms with, although I don't think Sheila Malcolmson is the one to actually lead that.
I saw a lot of, there was more reaction than you could describe here in our show to Lynda's piece online, but some of it rang so true in that, or I shouldn't say so true, sounded so familiar in that so many of the issues we have when talking about the rise in things like petty crime and vandalism and threats and things that I have and my family have experienced personally in Victoria, so often when these issues are raised, it's met with sometimes denial, sometimes, an eyebrow raise, like, it's bad taste to even mention this. Or just, well, how dare you? It's, these are people who are unwell. You shouldn't be bringing this up, as if you should just accept the person smoking crack, in one personal example, in your garage, or, the needles on the playground. Well, that's just, we're in an overdose epidemic. That should be fine. Don't worry about it. Of course worry about it. Of course bring it up. Why would you not? That doesn't mean we can't talk about the solutions, but denying the problem is, denial.
And I don't get the sense that any of us want to blame the addict or blame the person who's unwell. We want to blame the system. Clearly the system has failed. And it's been failing for 40 years, and it's getting progressively worse, and to the point where you now feel unsafe. Look, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3.5", north of 200 pounds. Like, I'm not worried about my personal safety in places like Langley or whatever. But, I'm going into our local Save on Foods where my daughters work, and there's someone in the parking lot, and he is having a meltdown, and he grabs the sanitizer station and just rips it and throws it on the ground, screaming and yelling obscenities, and stalks off. And you're like, this isn't great. Like, I don't really want my 15-year-old daughter having to deal with this at work. And, I've sat in the, hung around the gas station up there for, a few extra minutes because there's been someone in the actual gas station store who's, clearly shoplifting and then, berating the 20-something-year-old worker at the counter for having the temerity to call him on his theft. Like, that's suburban Langley. Like, this isn't the downtown east side, for example. The other part of it is, like, I'm highly skeptical of some folks who rush to the defense of what we're doing now, because they all seem to have a vested interest in the current situation. There's a whole industry on the downtown east side. More money, government money, flows into the downtown east side than any other postal code in Canada. And it hasn't worked. But there's a lot of people who rely on that money, on government money, in order to do things. Not the least of which is Atira Housing Corporation, which runs a lot of not-for-profit or affordable housing. God bless them. But Jeanette Ash, the candidate for the BC NDP, sits on that board, right? Like, you kind of start pulling all the threads together, and you're like, we got to do it different, man. Like, this is not working. And we can pretend it's going to get better magically, but nothing ever does. No. And so it's time to actually take a different approach and start talking about these things. Like, good on Lynda for having the courage to write this, to talk about it. And, I'm hopeful that, I just keep going back to that compassionate thing where it's like, I wouldn't want my child to live like that. I wouldn't want my sister to live like that. I wouldn't want my parent to live like that. I would do whatever it takes to get them out of this situation. Do I owe those people any less?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Let's talk about one other sort of increasingly acknowledged, I'm going to go ahead and use the word crisis because I think we're there, and that is the family doctor shortage in BC. It's bad everywhere. It's particularly acute where I live in Greater Victoria. I think the latest numbers are something like 900,000 people in British Columbia are without a family doctor. It's something like 1 in 4 in Greater Victoria, the capital, which is astonishing. Now, there was a great story this morning in Kamloops this week about the problems attracting family doctors there. And you would have read about it in the Fin, but for some pretty hairy technical problems, believe me, I screamed. But trust me, the problem is acute across the province. And it's getting worse, Jordan. We're seeing a lot of walk-in clinics close here in Victoria. It's something like 5 in the last couple months. This is not a big city. It is increasingly difficult for people to bring this up because they instantly get accused of, oh, you just want American-style private healthcare. No, I just want a doctor.
Yeah.
Now, I have a family doctor. I'm very lucky. But 1 in 4 people in this city don't, and that's insane.
Yes. You're right. It is not good. Yeah, it always defaults back to the American situation, right? And the one thing we do not ever talk about with the American situation is that all of their outcomes are better than ours. And if by embracing the single payer system as we have, and I think by and large it's, proven out to work fairly well. But by embracing that system, we have made sacrifices on the other side. And I think it's okay to talk about it. I mean, years ago, there was a book by Jeffrey Simpson, a Globe and Mail reporter, called Critical Condition.
Yes, I know the one.
Yeah, and it was excellent. Looked at the healthcare system, looked at how we push people to hospitals, which is like the most expensive form of care we could possibly give them. And, it talked about how we're paying Cadillac prices for a Chevy Sprint, healthcare model. We've got to be better. And I can tell you, look, I was a taxpayer watchdog for 6 years with the CTF. Canadian Taxpayers Federation. It was very difficult to tackle healthcare spending because we're not doctors, we're not nurses. God knows we appreciate the work of everyone in the healthcare system, and we want them to be successful. We would have the odd story about bureaucracy bloating at Fraser Health or too many comms people at Vancouver Coastal Health, but you're talking about you're talking about lots of money, but in the scheme of 50% of your budget spent as a province, relatively small amounts of money. But no one felt comfortable enough coming out, we just don't know the system well enough to explain what's going on. Well, now you're seeing the wheels come off. And we're closing in on 1 million people without family doctor in British Columbia. You're then shifting all this reliance onto the walk-in clinics. Those doctors there can't keep up. They're shutting down, which then transfers it to where? Emergency rooms at the hospital. And that, again, is the most expensive form of care we could possibly provide. So you just look for dollar for money, value for money. We need to get people out of hospitals and find other ways to treat them. Last week you and I talked about midwives. Let's up those. We talked about recognizing doctors from other jurisdictions. I know that Dick's had an announcement today about doing that with nurses. Great,
that's right.
Great, good. I've been happy for nurses. I know many. They are all overworked. They are all amazing people. They all deserve 3 times what they're paid now, for the bullshit they put up with. They deserve that, and they've been worked to the bone these past few years. But that doesn't solve the doctor problem, right? You've got to have more of those. So where are they coming from? What's the plan? Are we activating every single school in this province to turn out more doctors? Are we finding paramedical, are there, other things that can take pressure off doctors that we can do? More nurse practitioners, more midwives, more of that kind of thing? Let's do that too. But this is not great. I fully expect a visit to Kilchena, no doubt tomorrow, from Adrian Dix, in which he'll say this was all Kevin Falcon's problem from 2011. But look in the mirror, folks. NDP, you've been in power 5 years. The amazing thing to me is Horgan basically came out this week and said, the Fed's dental plan's a great idea. We'll sign on for the dental care. We can't even fund the healthcare we have. In the same article, he goes on and just shreds the Trudeau government for how underfunded healthcare is in the provinces. And he's, I believe Horgan's chair of the Confederation Leaders or whatever. He's chair of the premiers right now. And so he's doing it in that regard. But you're going, guys, like, this money has to materialize from somewhere. So if you're putting more money into dental, great, but how's that going to affect the rest of the healthcare spend? That's money that they can't borrow to give you for healthcare, so there's trade-offs here. I'm not sure that the connection there is really struck the premiers yet.
No, well, I mean, the assumption is that they'll eventually get Ottawa to pony up, but it's a pretty ballsy assumption, to be honest. And I mean, we've seen this playing out for years with different governments. It just make the assumption that Ottawa will fund it. And in BC, it worked with childcare, so you never know. But you're quite right. I mean, there's
still a cost to childcare for the provinces. And look, these agreements run out at some point. Look, at one point, healthcare was going to be funded by the feds. And then they transferred some tax points, and then they monkeyed around, and then the amount became less and less and less and less from the feds, and the provinces started spending more and more and more to the point where we are now. So no deals forever in politics. Like, they're not going to sign a lifetime contract to say we're going to fund dental services in your provinces forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Amen. They can't do it. So where are we headed here?
Well, not to the family doctor, that's for sure.
Well, this is my kind of problem with pharma, like a national pharmacare program as well, is that we've yet to see the federal government ever deliver a national program in a cost-effective manner. Like the gun registry springs to mind. I know those are very different kind of things, but they can't even run a pay system for their employees. But we think they're going to run a national pharmacare program. I rely on my warfarin to live, and so I would very much like not to monkey around with the prescription drug system at this point, because I feel very comfortable that my warfarin is going to be there when I need it. But putting the federal government in charge of stuff like that makes me nervous.
Well, and fair enough, especially when it is literally a lifeline in your case. Mm-hmm. Now, we talked briefly about things to talk about before the show, and I've forgotten the one before the federal politics section. Is there something I'm missing?
I just want to mention that I saw Kevin Falcon this week.
Oh, okay, yes.
And he was just back from a trip to Lytton, in which he has seen with his own eyes the provincial premier, with the premier and the Solicitor General and the Minister of Public Safety have not seen with their own eyes, which is the fact that Lytton is still essentially the same as it was the day after the fire. Still chimneys standing there charred, still cars burned out. Like, there's been little discernible work done there. The federal government has come through. There's a First Nation that is nearby. That First Nation, the Indigenous area, has been rebuilt. No problems. Hard to believe that the federal government's outperforming the provincial government on this, but they have. And one of the things I've heard from folks in Lytton is that the premier flew over the first day, flew out of Kamloops, flew over Lytton. Oh, that's terrible. Turned around and flew back to Kamloops and disappeared to Victoria.
You mentioned, I've been talking to people in Lytton working on something for a while, and you mentioned the First Nation there, and you said nearby. My impression, and from what people are telling me there, is it's literally just across a fence. It's not like it's, you have to drive 10 minutes to get there, and it's a whole new world. You can see it physically. It's just, on the other side of the fence. And the difference in how far it's come along is just absolutely visually striking, and I don't have any images to share, but I mean, at least 5 different people have described this feeling to me of just being on the other side of the fence and thinking, they're so much further ahead than we are. Why? It's and the answer is, you ask them, and it's like, well, it's because it's Ottawa that's driving it, and they're ahead of the game in this case, and it's just the provincial side on Lytton it's not even behind, Jordan. It's been months.
It's red tape. It's bureaucracy. It's an uncaring provincial government. But we just said that, no, we believe they care. They just don't care enough to do anything about it. It's a non-government riding. It's all these things added up. Here's what I'm confused about. We have had multiple disasters in recent years. Of course, we had the landslides, mudslides, flooding that took out huge chunks of the highways, railways. Those were rebuilt within weeks.
Yes.
Rebuilt. reopened within weeks. Environmental permits being turned around in minutes, what would normally take months to get. COVID, we rolled out programs in a way the government had never done before. We've shown now the government can do things quickly. And then you have Lytton. And they can't even clear debris. They can't rebuild. Insurance kind of caps you at 2 years. Their dollar is becoming less and less valuable because of inflation, especially in construction. They are losing everything. And, Premier Horgan and Minister Farnworth just go on their merry way and say, no, everything's under control. It is clearly not. It's clearly not happening. So do whatever it takes to get those folks back into Lytton. Lytton was supposed to be a rebuilt community that would be a model to the province of a climate change friendly community, according to John Horgan in the moments after it burned. I guess the future of climate change friendly communities are to be burned out hulks with no one living in them. That's the John Horgan plan for Lytton at this point. So I just don't understand why. Well, I do understand why this doesn't get more media attention. It's because it's an old story. The media are busy in Vancouver. They don't have the resources to send a camera to Lytton. But we've got to keep banging this drum. And God bless Jackie Taggart. She's doing her best, but to hold the NDP to account on this. But the NDP are failing those people every day, and we're almost coming up on a year. It's unbelievable.
A year of some people living in hotels. The neighbors split across the province. I talked to one person who is in Chilliwack, and their next door neighbor is now in Cranbrook. And it's at a certain point, and this is something else that keeps coming up, is there's a fear that these people are never coming back, because it's one thing, not ideal. But it's one thing to be camped out in a hotel for a few months, a couple towns down the road. It sucks. But it's quite another when it's a year, and of course, life starts to move on. You find a job in Cranbrook or Prince George or Vancouver, and then it's like, well, I got this thing going here. Who's going to come back to Lytton? I think there's already a certain chunk of people who did live there that will never go back, and not just because of what happened, but because look, it's been so long that of course they've started to pick up the pieces on their own with no help, and started to build a life somewhere else where they can actually have a home. Yeah,
no, you're exactly right. So I don't know, man. It's so demoralizing because of what those people have been through. And they were promised by their government that help was on the way, and nothing is materialized. I mean, they still don't have archaeological permits, as if these are existing buildings. Just clear. And how are you going to do archaeology when everything's burned on top? You can't. You got to clear that out anyway. So at least do that. But no, it boggles the mind what's going on there. I'm completely perplexed by it. I don't know how Mike Farnworth is allowed to get like this.
You mentioned the archaeology permits. I've heard this from a few people as well, where you have to have an archaeological assessment, and then the question is, well, okay, sure. How do I find an archaeologist? And the answer is, it's your problem. Do you think it's easy to find an archaeologist, bring them up to Lytton, and pay them to sift through burned out rubble?
Yeah. And look,
this is outrageous.
It is outrageous. And okay, great. So the province says you got to have an archaeologist. Great. Province, find a team of 5 or 10 archaeologists or whatever, bring them in for a week, have them comb the thing and do what they got to do, and then you can at least get certain parts rebuilding again. But, they won't even do that. And the funny thing is, at the very beginning, this was such a tragedy on so many people's minds. I'm sure you could have found some archaeologists who would have been willing to give their time or rearrange things in order to make it happen. Now it's a year later, and even they know it's a joke. It's a joke. And so I do not understand at all. It does make me a little worried. Imagine if that was your community. Imagine if that was, well, you'd be fine because you're on Vancouver Island, so of course John Horgan couldn't possibly ignore you. But, for those of us poor schmucks in Langley, it's easy for him to forget that there is a province beyond his little bubble on the island. So I just do what it takes. Get the trucks there, start cut through the red tape, do whatever it takes to make these people whole.
Either that or just say it's not happening. Move on. It's it's almost more cruel to keep saying it's coming. It's been a year. At a certain point, just say
Yeah, for sure.
For whatever reason. Don't do that, please. But at a certain point, my God, it's been when was the fire? It's almost been a year.
Yeah, it was last summer. So
yeah,
it's been 9 months or so. It's unreal.
Babies have been born. All right. Well, I usually end up signing off by saying happy politics, but I think we worked ourselves up a little bit at the end.
Two things. I got two little things. First of all,
please do.
Number one, special congratulations to our friend Lynda Steele, who, according to her social media feeds, got married on the weekend in England. Congratulations. And go ahead.
Yes, congratulations, and I hope you are not listening to this on your honeymoon, but in a couple weeks when you're catching up on the archives.
Of course, she's listening to it on her honeymoon. I was actually
nothing could be more romantic.
I was picking up pizza a couple weeks ago for my kid's birthday in Langley, and Jim's Pizzeria, best pizza in Walnut Grove, by the way. And this guy gets out of the truck next to me, and he's giving me the eye, and he's like, "Hey, I listened to your podcast." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Thanks. I'm sorry that you have to put up with Maclean." No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Anyway, so shout out to him. And then also Maclean, we are 1 week from today. 1 week from today where I will meet Russell Wilson, interview him at the ICBA Gala. And I've worked through the questions. Maclean, are there any questions you want me to ask the great Seahawk turned Bronco quarterback?
How many Super Bowls are you bringing to the good people of Denver? Is it 3 or 4, potentially more?
Yeah.
That's really what I want to know. Is like how big of a bookshelf do I need to build for all of my replica Lombardi trophies?
Okay, I will see if I can put that in. I'll phrase that somehow. The funny thing is we've been buying Seahawk jerseys for certain folks who are attending. And the price has really bottomed out. Like at the beginning, the Seahawk jersey, a Wilson Seahawk jersey was like $190, $200. Now you can get them for about $45. They're plunging. They're plunging in value. So, and the Bronco ones aren't available yet up here. But
no, fair enough. I mean, that's what happens when a player moves on, and it's you're supposed to all rush to buy a Drew Lock jersey. Don't do that. Let's waste money.
All right. Anyways, Jillian's definitely not listening to this part.
No, we've lost her long ago. And I mean, if we were laughing about how romantic it is to listen to this on your honeymoon, it's especially romantic to listen to us talk about sports on the political podcast you're catching on your honeymoon. Jillian, we wish you nothing but the best, and you'll hear from us again in a few weeks. The rest of you, we'll talk to you next week. Until then, he's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. Happy politics.